EJ. Good deal. All right. Don't get stage fright. Find it. Okay. So now, if memory serves, we're actually starting chapter 3, Esther 3 this morning. So, well, I'm good. I'm happy to see that. Hi, Kathy. I'm happy to see that that as many people were able to make it in here safely as were in this monsoon this morning. But but we've got a good crowd for Bible study. I see that that Pat is set up to read for us this morning, and we'll go ahead and open with a prayer, and then I'll do a brief synopsis, and then we'll jump right into chapter 3. Um, so let's go to our Father in prayer. Almighty, gracious, and loving Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the rains. We thank you for the safety that you've afforded us as we have traveled. We thank you so much for your word and the opportunity that we have to come together and study it. We thank you for these days with which we are blessed, wherein we might observe the blessings that you bestow upon us. And we ask, Heavenly Father, that our study be scripturally sound and pleasing in your sight, and that it strengthen us in our ability and our desire to share your word with the rest of the world and to work in your kingdom on a day-to-day basis. We ask, Heavenly Father, that you be with those who are traveling on the road and keep them safe. We ask that you be with those who are, and we thank you for the safe return of those who have been traveling, and we're very happy to have everyone back together again. We ask that you be with those who are recuperating in the hospital. We ask that you be with Barbara. We ask that you be with Wayne and as we ask that you be with Fran to recover from her issues and keep her safe as well. We ask that you be with Keith and Camille, and we know that Keith is still struggling with a cut foot, and that slows him down quite a bit. And we ask that you be with them this holiday as they face some of the same problems as so many others in this area face, and then that is short-term furloughs and loss of income. We ask that you continue to be with Mike and Karen's family, and that you be with Jim and Sanders' family as they address the issues that they have. And I almost forgot to be with Camille's son Christopher as he recuperates from his automobile accident. He was very fortunate, and he was not hurt worse than he is, but he still got some bruises and an injured ankle. And we ask that you be with them and be with family as they address those issues as well. There are a host of other things which will escape me at this time, Father, but they never escape you, and we ask that you continue to reach out and protect us. We thank you for the lessons that we have and the ability we have to reach out in this upcoming season and share with others the gospel, and share with others the example of Christian living that shines a light on the rest of the world. We ask that you continue to guide us and protect us, and we thank you so much for the gift of your Son. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen. Okay, so we're in, looks like this thing kind of took a downturn here. Let me see if I can get it back up and running. Okay, now I'm going to have to run back through here again. I still haven't figured out how to change the timeout on this thing, and I know I'm going to have to come up here and fiddle with it a little bit to get it to work. But as we get to Esther 3, I'll go ahead and get to that point. There we go. Get to Esther 3, and we know that we've seen Esther put in installed as the queen, as Xerxes' queen, and there are a few things that we want to note, and that is that remember I mentioned that Xerxes over from his father took over the kingdom from his father, and immediately set about trying to get his build an army, a rather large army. It was over 1 million men, and a fleet of naval ships of somewhere in the range of 1,400 naval ships that he used to go against Greece, where his father Darius had failed before. And so the initial expelling of Vashti, as it turns out, Vashti, that was just before he launched his 4-year campaign. And so whenever he came back and it says he remembered Vashti, it's interesting that it says that because according to the historians, according to Herodotus, one of the reasons Vashti refused to present herself to the members is that she was very pregnant with his son. Okay, and so and it's interesting that he was so inconsiderate that he didn't think about this, but in the 4 years that he went off to war, she gave birth to to that that child, a male child, and raised him. Now he comes back, he's got a 3 or 4 year old son that he hasn't seen, and she's in a completely different part of the kingdom, and she's got the baby, but he's already banished her, so he can't order her to come back, and he's on the horns of a dilemma. And so, but remember that his viziers, the ones who advised him to banish her in the first place, to exile her to another part of the kingdom in the first place, don't want her back because she's going to exact her revenge, and they're going to be in some serious trouble. So they found a way to present an alternative for that, and it happened to play into his plans. Whenever he came back after that horrendous defeat, I mean, he had 1,400 ships that were defeated by a fourth of that number of Greek and Spartan ships, and they were driven to land on the coast of Turkey, driven away off the sea and to land on the coast of Turkey, where a Greek army, which had crossed over, flanked them and destroyed probably more than half of a million-man army. And when he went back, he had lost money, he had lost capital, he had lost political favor, and so but he retired basically to his harem at that point, and drowned his sorrows in his harem. And that was at the recommendation of his viziers, because they said there's one thing that we know that he's going to do that'll get him out of our hair, basically. So they had made that, and then they proposed that he have all the virgins gather up the virgins, and presumably from the noble families. And so it's interesting that Esther, as a young Jewish girl, of course she kept that secret, would turn up in that harem, and you have to wonder how that happened, or would turn up into in the house of virgins, basically, as a candidate. However it is, God put her there, and we have to look at the hand of God. We have to see the hand of God in that as we look at these. And I think that I'm going to jump forward here because I want to show something to you, a couple of things, and I'll probably bring them back in, and right here at the end. There we go. Okay, so we look at the timeline of Esther, and we look at 539 BC, where Cyrus becomes king. And then we look at 536 BC, where the temple reconstruction begins. And then in 523, Darius I becomes king. And then in 517 BC, the temple is completed. And during that period of time, Habakkuk and Zechariah are the two prophets that are God's work there in that. But of course, we will note that even though the prophets were busy, God was busy at work anyway, taking care of business. And so between 500 BC and 458 BC, we see that Malachi was probably the predominant prophet. But we have the book of Ezra that comes in. But we see that 487 BC inherits the kingdom from Darius. And inherits his battle woes as well. Okay, but Esther becomes queen in 480 BC. So we see that 3 years after Xerxes became king, he banished Vashti, and then he launched on his campaign, and then he came back, and Esther was installed as queen. And during that period of time, between 500 BC and 458, we see that Malachi's prophecies are probably have come into play at this point. But we see then that Artaxerxes, that is the son that Vashti bore, okay, becomes the king in 465, and then in 458, Ezra, who as actually one of his advisors, is now sent to Jerusalem, as well as Nehemiah in 446, and of course we see that 13 years after that, he returned to make his report to the king after things had been put in place and the walls were in place. Of course, we note that he also returned, and he had a great deal to say about how they had fallen into disarray, spiritually speaking. And then 423, 10 years after he returned, Darius II was installed as king. And the reason is probably because there was so much subterfuge going on, and Artaxerxes himself did not survive the plots. Artaxerxes came to power because Xerxes, his father, was assassinated. All right. There were several assassination attempts and several bonds that were made, several alliances that were made. And of course, we'll be talking about a little bit of that this morning. But we note that the first plot was the one that Mordecai got wind of and passed on to Esther, and Esther then made sure that Mordecai received the credit for having provided this information to the king, and that it was recorded. Why? Because Xerxes had a terrible memory. He forgot the good things you did for him, and he remembered the bad things. And I guess that's the way of the world, and has been. But I'm gonna, as I back this up, I want to point something out here. I'll bring this back up again. But God has laid his plans to preserve his chosen people. As we look at some of the examples, he sent Joseph to be seated near the throne of Egypt as an advisor, as a trusted advisor. He brought up Moses in the Pharaoh's palace and made him royalty, made him an heir to the throne. Okay, which of course he rejected, if you will. And then in their captivity, he made Daniel the third ruler of the kingdom, according to Scripture, because of the events that took place, where he was able to interpret the king's dream. Okay, and we're talking about the Babylonian king. But remember that Daniel continued to be because Daniel was in the lion's den, and that was not under the Babylonian king, that was under the Persian king. Okay, and so he not only converted the Babylonian king, but he also had an awful lot to do with softening the Persian king's view toward the Jews as well. And then we see that God has placed Esther in this strategic place to prevent the destruction of the people of Israel. And what we've seen right now is that again, she has followed in accordance with the fifth commandment: honor thy father and thy mother. She has followed the directions and the advice of Mordecai, who is basically her serving in the capacity of her father. Okay, and so she has concealed her Jewish nationality and continued to do so at his request. And she has now revealed the assassination plot on behalf of Mordecai, and she got Mordecai's name in the public record. That's going to come into play later on. Okay, and so, but obviously the king forgot about that. But God would would find a way to remind him of this. And so that sets the stage for Haman's misbehaving and Haman's own undoing in Mordecai's and Mordecai be receiving that place of honor that he had. And we'll see that not only did Haman's holdings all go to Esther. Esther then placed Mordecai in charge of them, and the king placed Mordecai in a place of honor whereby he could continue to administer, and especially to the benefit of the Jewish people who were in their exile at that time. So now I'll go back to the beginning here, or back to the beginning of chapter 3, and we will note that I mentioned it as Haman versus Mordecai, but remember that he had a plot against the Jews, and there's going to be a lot going on here. So I'm going to go ahead and let Pat go ahead and read the first two verses, please.
After these things, the king Ananias promote Haman, the son of the Amethadite, the Agite, and advanced him and set him with him. And all the king's servants, the king's gates, bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence.
Okay, now I want you to note that this bowing is not just a formal nodding of the head or anything that's going on here. This is as gods, as the Babylonian kings likewise as gods. In fact, as just about all heathen kings were viewed as gods. When you worship them, you got down on the ground and put your face on the ground. You prostrated yourself before them. Okay, that's the phrase. That is a sign of worship which God forbade for the Jewish people to anyone but God Himself. Okay, and that's important to remember. But I also note it says that Haman is the son of Hamadatha the Agagite. Now you're going to hear that twice. I don't think that's accidental that he is called Haman the son of Hamadatha the Agagite. Remember that the king has just come back. He's out of money. He's out of political favor with the people, and he needs to form alliances to cement his position as the king to prevent more of those same assassination attempts. And Hamadatha is apparently a very wealthy man because his son will be able to eventually offer $10 million for the right to kill all the Jews. And the king doesn't take that money. He doesn't need that money. Well, he probably knows that that Haman's money is Hamadatha's money. And he's already getting money from Hamadatha in all probability at this point, because that's what happens to kings. You know, they run out of money and they find some noble baron or somebody to bankroll them, and they give them special privileges. And so Hamadatha was probably in a good enough position that he said, well, promote my son Haman. And Haman, being a very ambitious, probably a very privileged man, wanted apparently to be honored just like the king. And so the king said, okay, I'll do that. All right. And so everyone was expected to, in addition to the king, lay down on the ground in front of Hamadatha. Well, Mordecai would not do that. He could not do that. Now, I note by the way that Mordecai's name comes from, remember, he was born there, and he was named after one of the Babylonian gods, actually a Neo-Akkadian god by the name of Marduk. And so Mordecai comes from the name Marduk. So he received his name, the name of basically a heathen god. But he certainly lived up to his faith in God when he did the things that he has done. And I point back to this, and I look at this, and you look at the word Agagite, all right? That is basically a word which means descended from Agag. Who is Agag? Do you remember who Agag is? Remember whenever Saul fought the Amalekites, and Agag was their king, and he was told to destroy all of the people and destroy all of and kill King Agag, which of course he refused to do. But and Samuel said to Saul, the Lord sent me to anoint thee to be king over his people, over Israel. Now therefore hearken thou unto the voice of the words of the Lord. Remember, this is the same episode where the king decided he was going to offer sacrifices on the altar before they went into battle because Samuel wasn't there. Okay. And so, therefore, hearken thou unto the voice of the words of the Lord. Thus saith the Lord of hosts. I remember that which Amalek did to Israel. The Amalek is the country, okay, the nationality. How he and of course there's a what do they call it? Metonymy of the king for the people, or the people for the king. So when he says Amalek, he's talking about their people too. And how he laid wait for him in the way when he came up from Egypt. Now go and smite Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep and camel and ass. Nothing of the Amalekite nation was to remain according to God. Okay? And this is because their sins had reached the point where their iniquity had become full, and it was time for God to do what he did during those days. Okay, there was goodness in God, but there was also severity, and this is God's punishment for the Amalekite people and those who made alliances with the Amalekite people. All right, and that's going to be important because we know that Saul came to the city of Amalek, and said to the Kenites who were living among and allied with the Amalekites, okay, said to the Kenites, go depart and get you down from among the Amalekites, lest I destroy you with them. For you showed kindness to all the children of Israel. So the Kenites departed from among the Amalekites. Now, in all probability, it is apparent that some of the Amalekites snuck away with the Kenites. And or the Kenites had intermarried with the Amalekites, because we see that, remember that he called rebellion a sin of witchcraft and stubbornness, as iniquity and idolatry, whenever he told Saul that that God had rejected him from being the king. That was the consequence of that. But one of the effects of that rebellion was that some of the Amalekites apparently escaped, because we're told, apparently, and now, of course, this is according to uninspired history, all right? But we're told in Esther that Haman and Aga, I can't remember his name now, his father, Haman and his father, were descendants of Agag in that bloodline. So you can see that when God tells you to do something, if you don't do it, there are downwind repercussions of that. And we certainly saw that during the period of the Judges. All that period of Judges, because they just would not do what God said, and that was to expel everybody from that country. They did not do it. They made pacts with them. They formed alliances, and they intermarried. And their problems just got worse. Okay? And so they still haven't figured that out. And now, all this time down the road in history, they're facing the consequences of Saul, apparently facing the consequences of Saul's disobedience to God. Okay? All right, so continue on, please, in verses 3 and 4.
Then the king's servant, which were in the king's gate, said to Mordecai, why transgressed thou the king's command? Then now it came to pass that when they spoke daily unto him, they hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew.
Okay, now say, I'm a Jew, okay? To God, I'm not supposed to do that. That's something that God does not allow me to do as a faithful Jew, to worship other gods. And so we go back to God speaking these words in Exodus 20, verses 1 through 6. And I think I might have them all there. God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. And then he says, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Verse 4 is not there, but he says, thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. Now we're talking about, that's a long time. That's a long time. And he's basically saying that you will bear the consequences. And in this particular case, it looks like those consequences were even more than 4 generations down the line. Okay? Because we're talking some probably 1,500 years or so that is taken for this to come to pass. Okay? All right. So continue on, please.
And when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did reverence, then was Haman full of wrath. And he thought to scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had shown the people of Mordecai. Or Haman sought to destroy all Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Amarias, even the people of Mordecai.
Okay, all throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, throughout Xerxes' whole kingdom, he wanted, because the Jews, Mordecai had said, not only I, other Jews are not going to bow down, because it's a sin, it's a violation of God's law. We can't do that. We're not going to put ourselves face down on the ground for a man. Say it, okay? And so Haman, full of pride, says, well, I think I can fix that. All right. And so continue. So read on through. Read verse 7.
And the first month, that is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, that is the lot, before Haman from the day to day, from month to month, to the 12th month, that is the month of Adar.
The month of Adar. And so they cast lots. That's what Pur means. It means lots. Purim is that's it's a, I believe that Pur is a Babylonian word, which means to cast lots. And it's interesting to know that in the site of Shushan, the palace, archaeologists found basically a crystal. It's kind of like a dice, is what it is. It's a crystal with numbers inscribed on them. They actually found one of these dice that are referred to in the Bible, and those lots were there so that they could determine what day was going to be the day, and they'd roll it, and the day would roll out, and this is going to be the month would roll out that will carry out this plan. And that's going to come into play later on. I don't even know if we'll get to it today. But so before Haman, day to day and month to month to the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. So the first month, they cast the lots. And they chose the 12th month, the month of Adar. And I believe they chose the 13th or 14th day, but we'll find that out later on down the road. Okay? And so this is Haman, who is so confident in his ability to turn Xerxes' head and to get his approval that he not only asked permission, he's already picked the day that he's going to do this. Okay? And he apparently thinks that the king needs his money. So, or he wouldn't have offered him the bribe he's about to offer him. So continue on, please. Read verses 8 and 9, if you would.
And Haman said unto the king, There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom, and their laws are diverse from all the people. Neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore it's not for the king's profit to suffer them. If it pleases the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have charge of the business to bring it to the king's.
Okay, so he says, I'll pay the money. I'll put up 10,000 talents. Now that's a weight, by the way. That's not a denomination. That is a weight of silver. At that particular time, it was about $10 million worth of silver. That's a lot of money in those days. That's a lot of money. I mean, nowadays it's probably more like $500 million or something, in terms of the weight of the silver. But the king apparently does not need that. But basically, he's saying the Jewish law is going to prevent them is coming into conflict with your law. Okay, and that law was whenever he appointed Haman. The law he's talking about here at this point is when he appointed Haman, he said everybody's going to worship you like they worship me, and they worship the king like a god. Okay, so Haman says if the Jews aren't going to do this, then obviously they're not going to obey your law. And so you have to do something about it. Well, apparently the king kind of buys into that because as you read 10 and 11, you'll see what it comes to.
And the king took his ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of the Amathite, the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. And the king said to Haman, The silver is given to thee, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to thee.
Okay, so now do it to them as it seemeth good to me. Now I note that whenever Pharaoh took the ring off his hand, he put it on Joseph's hand and gave him vestures of fine linen. So he actually made Joseph a part of his royal kingdom, but he put it on his hand. But remember this, though, that the Pharaoh did not authorize him to make law. Under the immutability of the law, the principle of immutability of the law of Persia, whenever the king gave him that ring, he gave him carte blanche to write laws and to affix his seal to it in the king's name, even though the king was not aware of what that law was. He could do it without prior approval. He gave Haman carte blanche to write this law. And it just amazes me that the man lived as long as he lived without being assassinated, because he was totally irresponsible as a leader. He was ruled by wrath, but certainly not ruled by a great deal of reason. Okay, and so we see that. But he says, the silver is given to thee. He says, you keep your money, but go ahead and do with it what you want. Okay, and again we see the son of Hamadatha the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. Hamadatha, the Jews' enemy. Okay, so we see that harkens back all the way back to 1 Samuel, the passage that we just read. All right, okay, so now, as we continue on, go ahead and start reading in verse 12, if you would, please.
Then were the king's scribes called on the 13th day of the first month, and there was written according to all that Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenants, and to the governors that were all over the province, and to the rulers of every people of every province according to the writings thereof, and to every people after their language. In the name of the king Ahasuerus was it written and sealed with the king's ring.
Okay, in the name of King Ahasuerus was it written and sealed with the king's ring. And I've highlighted that because I want to point out to you what I just said, and that is that the king had given carte blanche. He hasn't even run this by the king yet, except in concept, as he talked to him about it. Okay, so he's laid this out. He's picked the time, and the 13th day of the first month is scribes together, and they wrote this thing up, and they put it out, and they published it in every language of the realm. Now we're talking about over 100 different languages. I think the estimate was there was over 120 different nationalities encompassed in that realm, including some from India and some from Ethiopia, from northern Africa. Okay, so that was a very extensive realm, and this law was going to be transmitted all over that. That would have probably pretty much have wiped out every Jew there was in the known world at that time. Okay, and so you see how dangerous this was. Okay, but also I note that there was probably would have been a great deal of alarm in the whole kingdom when this was passed. Why? Because I just said there were over 100 nationalities, and if a king could pass a law that said that this one nationality will be destroyed wholesale, what's to prevent those other nationalities from being destroyed as well? If this law, this precedent was put out there, then it could be extended to other nationalities and basically create a what do they call it? Ethnic cleansing, such as has gone on in so many places here of late. Okay, and so
Like
the
Hitler.
letters were sent, verses 13 and 14.
The letters were sent by post into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, and in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to take the spoil of them for prey.
So according to that law, on that specific date, and obviously they would have to have time to prepare for this, and so it was not a bad thing as far as Haman was concerned. And these people didn't have where were they going to go? They couldn't go anywhere. The edict was to go all the way from Ethiopia to parts of India. Where are they going to go to get away from this edict? They basically were rendered at this point helpless to wait for 11 months for their fate to come to them. Okay, and so and that fate is destroy, kill, cause to perish all Jews, young and old, little children and women, on that one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. Okay, and so that copy of the writing was published so that they could be ready for that day. Now I'm going to take this and I'm going to read because the critical scholars will give you their take on this, and they will try to tell you that this can't be true, it can't be scriptural, because that's not something that he would do. Give them a whole year, almost a whole year, to escape their fate. As I mentioned before, this was going out to the whole kingdom. There was no place they could go to escape. They weren't going to get away. Okay, and so others have pointed out that it was a terribly foolish thing for Haman to have published a whole year in advance his intention of exterminating the Jews, but archaeology has uncovered dramatic information on how this happened. Haman's method for fixing the day for the destruction has been revealed by excavations at Shushan, Susa, by a man by the name of Dulafoy, who actually recovered one of those prisms, quadrangular prisms engraved with the numbers 1, 2, 5, and 6, the word pur, described from the Persian word puru, which means lot, and it is now known that they cast pur, that's chapter 3, verse 7, and that they cast lots, in other words, and that explains why almost a year elapsed. Haman was so sure of receiving the king's permission, I mentioned this before, that he actually cast lots for the day he would do it before even mentioning the matter to the king. And then he offered that tremendous amount of $10 million to try to get the king's attention. Okay, and he did so. So as we continue on, and we're almost done with this chapter, we've noted that the copy was given for the command. The commandment given in every province was published unto all people that they should be ready against that day. And then verse 15 tells us what?
The post went out. The post went out, being hastened by the king's commandment, and a decree was given in the Shushan palace. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was perplexed.
Okay, so there's the contrast. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city was in an uproar, was panicked. And well, it should have been, because remember that this was the palace. This palace had all sorts of people from all different countries and all different nationalities who were there. But not only that, the upon for a lot of people's livelihood. Other nationalities as well were looking at this and thinking, as I've said before, well, if he can do this to one nationality, he can do this to our nationality as well. So there was that potential threat of ethnic cleansing, widespread ethnic cleansing going on in a society that was a composite society, something, as I said before, probably in the neighborhood of upwards of 100 nationalities and languages and societal backgrounds, all these things which would have been great cause for uproar in the city. And so it was pretty obvious that Haman and Xerxes were pretty out of touch with the will and the wants of the people in that area. And so this is where we will leave it. I'm going to mark it here. And are there any questions or comments? That is an old custom. If you recall that when they tore their clothes off and they dipped themselves in ashes, it was a sense of mourning. Remember, Lot did that. Job rent his clothes and covered himself in ashes. It was a way of mourning. It was a visible sign of mourning, is what it was, so that people would understand. You wail, you put ashes on yourself, heaping ashes on their head, heaping hot coals on their head, as Jesus talked about on his Sermon on the Mount. He says that it would heap hot coals on their head. What he meant was that they would be brought to shame. It was a sign of shame, a sign of loss, a sign of mourning. And so, and the whole nation, I don't know if you noticed that or not, but the whole nation did that. They put themselves in sackcloth and ashes and mourned. Just like, there you go, a great analogy, dressed in black for a funeral, okay? A sign of mourning. It was an outward sign of mourning for them, okay? All right, if there are no more questions, we'll take a break. We'll be back at the top of the hour. Thank you very much for your attention, and we'll see everybody at the top of the hour for our service.